Welcome to the Red Chip Poker Podcast, where we share stories and strategies from the game's most fascinating minds. No matter where you are in your poker journey, there's always something new to learn. So let's get right into today's conversation with your host, Robbie Straczynski.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Red Chip Poker Podcast. I'm your host, Robbie Straczynski, and on today's episode, we'll be speaking with the pot of gold at the end of the poker rainbow. Such a vivid description could only be applied to one of Ireland's favorite sons. I'm referring to none other than David Lappin. Welcome to the show, sir.
Lovely to be here, Robbie. Thank you so much. And I love the Red Chip strategy courses, so it is an honor to be on the show.
Thank you so. Oh, you're already in our good graces. Okay, we'll use the easy set of questions that we've prepared then, David. So,
No, bring it on. Got you away, sir. Got you away.
All right. Well, David is not only an accomplished professional poker player, but he's also an ambassador for Unibet Poker, one of the more popular online poker sites in Europe, as well as the co-host of the Chip Race Poker Podcast, which just recently won the Global Poker Award for 2018 Podcast of the Year. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Yeah, huge surprise, I must admit. It was a big surprise to be nominated, if I'm honest. I think Dara and I certainly would have hoped we'd make that long list. I'm sure you got sent that long list of 20 or 25, but no way did we think we'd make the top 5, let alone win it. So huge surprise. So grateful to Alex, Eric, Roland and Hans there at GPI. I know they did an awful lot of work. A lot of thankless work, actually, when you consider some of the grief they got afterwards. They probably get more grief now that they gave us the award, but I guess that's for them to deal with now.
Well, it certainly is a wonderful accolade. You had mentioned your co-host, Dara O'Kearney, a former guest here at the Red Chip Poker Podcast. And we'll be touching upon those items later, your Unibet Poker ambassadorship and the Chip Race, a little bit later in today's show during the interview. But I'd like to start by giving the floor to you a little bit, David. Your record as a poker player, it speaks for itself. Anyone can go on the Hendon Mob or on Pocket Fives and see your stats. But as you're based in Malta and frequenting the European circuit, you're not really necessarily as well known outside of Europe. And our audience here at the Red Chip Poker Podcast is mostly American. I've known you for a while, of course, but maybe take a minute or two before we get into the proper question asking. Maybe introduce yourself a little bit to our audience.
Well, I guess the short answer is I've been playing poker for about 13 years. I spent about 4 of those years in Connecticut, so I'm a little connected to the US scene there. I played in Mohegan Sun and Foxwoods and grinded online in the States, I think between maybe 2008 and 2011. So, yeah, familiar a little bit with the Americans and have lots of American poker friends, of course. But, 13 years playing. I've been a Unibet ambassador for the last 2.5. It's a great honor to do that. Obviously, that's sort of the holy grail for poker players to become sponsored, and particularly when it's a brand that you really are happy to get behind because you like what they're doing in the poker space. So that's great. My results are probably that of a journeyman to some description. I have had some very nice years over the years. I'm probably a quote unquote grinder. I think I went about 60 weeks at the beginning of or 60 months, I should say, at the beginning of my career without a single losing month. So
that's
I was doing
5 years in translation. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry for the American viewers who maybe aren't using metric. That's 5 years. No, we were grinding away sit and goes for a lot of that. Obviously, that helped keep the variance at bay when I was starting out. And then, I suppose a couple of good results around 2009, 10, 11 sort of propelled me up the echelons, I suppose. And for a good number of years, I've been playing on the European circuit, dabbling a little bit in the States in the last couple. And I have also been fortunate enough to work with some great people creating content. You mentioned there the Chip Race. I also write a blog. Hoping to maybe do some more creative stuff in the future. My background is in screenwriting, so I'm actually a failed writer who's become a poker player and really still struggling to get the creative juices flowing.
Excellent. Well, in a way, the that sort of dovetails into our first question. For better or for worse, maybe you could have ended up as the preeminent screenwriter of this generation, but that didn't happen. You got into professional poker playing, and obviously you've been doing it for so many years. So at the very least, you've managed to make a living out of it. I do want to ask you a little bit. Let's start our questions here on the professional poker playing front. Obviously, everyone here at Red Chip Poker, we all love poker. What is it that made you decide that that poker was your calling, so to speak, and become a professional? Was it just, not necessarily hacking it as a screenwriter, or was it something else?
I had no job. I had been writing for the national broadcaster in Ireland, RTE. I had created a 6-part TV show, which they commissioned and paid me to write for about 9 months. And then, unfortunately, and I think it coincided with the economic collapse in Ireland, although I don't want to blame that because they may have just chosen it to drop my show because they didn't like it anymore. But unfortunately, that put me out of a job. They didn't continue developing that project. And I used to play poker on the side, probably made beer money, probably wasn't a donkey. So I started dabbling online and thought to myself, well, if I put 40 hours a week, could I make a living from this? And it did. And I little by little, I was keeping the wolf from the door. Maybe those first 2 years were living pretty close to the wind, but we managed to hang on in there. And then, I guess just my enthusiasm for the game, it really became a passion. I started reading everything I could read and started watching videos when they started being made in the poker space. And I just couldn't but have my brain occupied by poker at all times. I just became really enthusiastic and developed a love for the game, which still exists today.
Fascinating. So you sort of fell into it, and then it grew on you. That's pretty awesome. And to have achieved a modicum of success in the chosen field is always a fun thing. Obviously you're far beyond the player you were when you first started out. As a professional, what are some of the characteristics that you believe someone would need to have a successful professional poker career, besides a tendency to run well and win flips, obviously?
I think they're very different now to what they were when I started. I think I always think of poker in terms of paradigms, and there have been sort of significant enough paradigm shifts over the last 12 or 13 years. When I started off, it was all about, could you get yourself into a learning space where you could learn from books, learn from other friends, talk through hands. It was all very anecdotal. This was, way before there was training videos out there and people had streamlined the learning process. Then, of course, the learning process became all about those videos, card runners, Blue Fire, I think, was Phil Galfon's site, and those sites basically took it on to the next level. And I think for players, it was a journey about not being in it anymore, being loose aggressive rather than tight. The tight guys used to win. Then it became important to be loose. But these days, to be honest, it's gone through further paradigm shifts as well. So I always think of it like Doyle and the old Chip Reese and all those guys were like road gamblers, and then they kind of got gobbled up by the jocks, the really overt, overly aggressive guys. And then those overly aggressive guys kind of got taken to task by maybe the good students, the nerds, the dorks, the guy who's like to read up on poker and learn the strategy. And I actually believe we're already in another paradigm now where those guys are being eaten alive. And that's probably my generation, if you like, the guys who were kind of went anecdotal I was one of the nerds. Those guys are probably being eaten up these days by the lads who are brilliant with software and using AI and using the technological tools of solvers, using Monker, using PO, and these kinds of tools are basically taking the game onto the next level. You see it there with the likes of David Peters or whoever at the very top of the game, Dominic Nietzsche, who have a very solver-based learning approach. And I think, to be honest, if you want to compete with the big boys, you have to be doing, when you begin in the game, what the best people are doing now, because it's only going to get tougher anyway. So I think you actually need to be very good with computers, to be very comfortable spending a lot of time running simulations and that kind of stuff. I try to do it. It's definitely not my forte. I'm a more conversational person who prefers learning that way. But I think, computer-based learning is probably the key. And I think you're going to see all the top players for the next 10 or 20 years come from that world.
Well, that is interesting. And I do want to ask you, based on your own personal experience, of course, here at Red Chip Poker, with all the fine products we have to improve our game, we know exactly how important study is. And without revealing any of your own proprietary secrets, what sort of study do you do at and away from the table to improve at the game? Or is it just more of a, you're not just a field player, you clearly must do something beyond that?
Yeah, I think feel is an aspect of the game, but it's definitely an overstated one. The vast majority of what you need are good fundamentals, good learning, as you say, all those fantastic products by you guys. And there are so many excellent products out there that can be used to fine-tune your game these days. PO would be one of the ones I would use mostly. In fact, when Dara and I do our strategy segments on the chip race, we allow PO to be kind of an extra voice in the room. So we will talk about the hand, and then there will be this PO voice saying what the game theory optimal solution would be. Not necessarily the correct one to maximize profits, but it's always there as a sort of a baseline for understanding a good strategy. And I think that's really important. I think overall, probably a mixture of that. Talking to Dara would be my biggest asset. I've got a couple of other very close poker friends, Jason Tompkins, Dara Davey, Nick Newport, James Noonan, a bunch of Irish guys who, we were all kind of a collective together for years and years. So they're still my best sounding board, and they still tell me when I'm doing stuff wrong. Dan Wilson, Porrick O'Neill, those guys are absolutely fantastic. And actually, it's no surprise they're the Irish guys who were around 10 years ago who are still around today, because this game can gobble people up pretty quickly if you're not if you don't stay on your toes.
Wow, certainly, and I definitely agree. Everyone knows that variance can really mess with your mind at times, especially if you're a tournament poker professional. You are thankfully still around, like you said, a decade later. But obviously, I imagine you've had your downswings over the years. Did you ever find yourself, David, at a point where you considered giving up the game altogether? Okay, that's it. I've had it. Can't do it anymore.
I'm having one right now, Robbie, so you've caught me right in the middle of one. If I'm honest, I did have one very bad one around 2011. I think it coincided with the breakup of my relationship and me moving back to Ireland. Maybe no surprise. Maybe my head wasn't in a great place. Also, I suppose I was getting a bit fed up of poker. I was just I'd lost the love for it for a little while. It took me a while to get back in. Actually, Dara O'Kearney was instrumental in convincing me to get back on the horse. I had kind of gotten a bit burnt. And at the moment, I can speak to it from the position of being within one, because I had such a good 2018. I probably my best year in a few years. Obviously, it's no surprise. Poker players are making less money these days. The sites have sort of waged war on the pro, feeling like any game structures, any approaches they can take, whether it be reduction in rate back or whatever across the board, isn't good for their bottom line. So they've sort of waged war on us, and because of that, everyone who plays for a living is sort of collectively making less. So that puts a bit of pressure on, and that maybe could help prolong downswings. That being said, I had such a good year in 2018. I guess I ran well live. I had some really nice results. Second place in one of the Irish majors. Just a slew of cashes, which was great. Online went really well. Obviously, Dara O'Kearney is the satellite master, but if he's the master, I'm the Padawan. I've always been pretty damn good at satellites as well, and that's been my bread and butter game for a long time too. So I've done very well on that circuit. That was going great. Even January went well, and then suddenly February and March, absolutely down the toilet. I think I've done, a considerable percentage of my roll in the last 2 months, hoping it will turn around. My poor girlfriend, every time I come back from the casino, is like, how much did you lose this time? And it's like, yeah, sorry. And we've got kids to feed. Well, we've got a child to feed. So, it puts a bit of pressure on that way. But no, I jest, of course. I've always observed pretty good bankroll management. I always anticipate these downswings, even when they're not happening, because I think you just have to do that as a player. So I have a bit of gallows humor about how I see it. I assume it'll turn around in the next month or two. If it doesn't, Robbie, oh God, I don't know what I'm going to do.
Oh goodness. Well, I'm sure we all have dealt with the slings and arrows of outrageous poker fortune. The question then is, there's obviously the mental game aspect to that. How do you deal with that type of a trying situation? How do you say, well, look, this is my job. I have to keep on going to the poker table, but 9 out of my last 10 sessions I've been losing, or I've been busting out on the bubble or near the bubble. How do you manage to sort of stay on your game and eventually climb out of that funk?
You do get used to it after a lot of years, to be honest. It would have affected me an awful lot more in the first 3 or 4 years. Any kind of downswing, even a downswing a fraction of what I'm having right now, would have bothered me an awful lot more. I'm a bit more worldly about it, or a bit more stoical. I suppose because I have these other strings to my bow now with the Unibet sponsorship, as an ambassador, my role in the community there, writing, creating a podcast. There are other forms of income generated from that stuff as well, which does obviously pad out any downswings. I can just hear my good friends who are legit full-time pros now without these other side incomes going, screw you, Dave. We're the ones out here actually battling. You get a wage every week, so it's not so bad for you. So I really shouldn't complain too much.
Well, I guess it's good, like with all things in life, not necessarily to place all your eggs in one basket, even if that is your main source of income as a professional poker player. It's a good lesson to have other things that you can rely on for the just in case you don't necessarily win one for a while. Well,
Absolutely. And to follow up on that, I shouldn't I shouldn't overstate my misery here. I have had several very very lucrative years in my poker career, and I'm not a big spender. I'm not somebody who kind of blows all my money or tries to ball out. So I've been wise, and just in case there's any family members out there who are worrying about me now, I want to make sure they know that even though the last couple of months have been brutal, I'm not doing too badly. I'm okay.
Your son still has his diapers. That's what you're saying.
For the moment, we've stockpiled a few.
Excellent. Well done. Well, David, we mentioned at the outset that you do, of course, primarily play in Europe on the European circuit these days. And you also mentioned you have played a little bit in the United States as well. How would you compare the skill level of Americans versus European players? And if that's a bit too broad, obviously, many different nations in Europe, maybe you could break it down a little bit by individual nations. Are there any particular strengths or weaknesses that the players from these nations tend to have from your experience?
Well, before I break down different sort of European tendencies, which I think are, broadly valid, although you can always get yourself a bit caught if you make too strict a stereotyping. America, to borrow a phrase my good friend Darrow O'Kearney likes to use, are sort of on their own evolutionary track these days, since being sort of taken from online or taken from the global online community. They're very much sort of in their own ring-fenced economy, maybe reinforcing their own 2012, 2013 kind of poker, which is far weaker as a game overall. That's not to say that there aren't some phenomenal American players who are well ahead of the curve, but as a collective, I think America are very much on their own evolutionary track, and we see that every year when we go out to the World Series. It's very obvious that there's certain things still going on in the game there, which you just don't even see at a recreational level in Europe. To look at European sort of qualities, I guess people talk about the Scandies being very strong, and the Germans, and I guess there's a sort of a seriousness and a calculated quality to those stereotypes that probably does fit to some degree. I think the Irish are a very creative nation. I think they like to express themselves at the poker table. That's sometimes good and sometimes not so good. And then I think the one obvious one I would always pick out, and I think this would be uncontroversial, is the Latino, the French, the Italians. There would be a sort of a bravado. I see it a lot here in Malta because we get a lot of Italians traveling for poker here. And there's a machismo kind of quality it's kind of the phrase in Ireland would be swinging their Mickeys around. There'd be lads who are just there to try and get one up on each other, not really playing a good overall strategy. But that's how they get a kick out of the game. And in the end of the day, the game is about enjoying yourself and expressing yourself and having a fun day when you do go. So I wouldn't begrudge anyone their style.
It certainly is, and it's always fun to hear that sort of description. Of course, poker is a global game. It is called the World Series of Poker, after all, and it's nice when we have the off once in a while European guest here on the Red Chip Poker podcast to get those perspectives. And we don't always necessarily play against players from those nations, but with the World Series of Poker coming up, it's interesting to get that sort of perspective from a seasoned live pro. David, you mentioned, of course, and we've talked about it already, you're ambassador for Unibet Poker, a site that many Americans might not be too familiar with, as of course they can't. Unibet Poker does not yet have a license to operate in the good old US of A. However, they do run a great series of live events called the Unibet Open during the year, which Americans, of course, if they go ahead and fly across the pond, they can go ahead and compete in. For those a little bit less familiar with them, maybe tell us a little bit about those great live events and what a player can expect if they decide to give one a try.
Absolutely. Well, first up, we have just acquired a license in the US for the first time.
Oh, is that right?
I'm not sure if there's going to be poker as part and parcel of the offering there, but that brand name, Unibet, may become a name familiar with some people over the next little while. I think this year will begin the rollout. Hopefully, at some point, it might mean poker. Maybe we'll end up with a Unibet Open Atlantic City. I'm not sure I would be thrilled to do that one, but I'll be set. I'll be okay. No, but joking aside, we had a wonderful event there in Las Vegas actually about a year and a half ago. We did a celebratory for our 10th year. event where we took all the qualifiers out to the win, which is obviously palatial. It's very fancy, and everyone had a wonderful time. It was a very successful event. The Unibet Opens are generally 4 or 5 stops across Europe. In recent years, we've had Copenhagen, London, Malta. Bucharest has become a real hotbed for us. We've actually gone and played in Bucharest and in a little town called Sinaia, a mountain town about an hour and a half from Bucharest, where you can ski. That was absolutely fantastic. That was a very special event run by our events manager, Natalie Sopaku-Peru, this year. And she's always looking to do interesting things with the stops. This year we've got, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say this podcast. There's a little time delay before it goes out. I think by the time it goes out, it'll be okay to have said that we are actually going to Paris at the end of the year as well, which is a very special one. That's actually not been announced yet. So if it turns out that that's bad information, I'm going to be in trouble. But I'm already known as K Lappin in the company, so it's okay.
Excellent. Well, Paris sounds like a pretty unbelievable destination. And you had mentioned Bucharest in Romania, the great Romanian capital. That's where I got to experience a Unibet Open Festival for the first time. You, of course, as a professional player, you've played all over Europe, including the WSOP, lots of different types of festivals put on by other online operators as well. What would you say is specifically unique about a Unibet Open Festival?
Yeah, I've got to say, I think the offering from all the online sites has overall decreased over the last few years, and that's a little disappointing. I think, that awareness of a bottom line has crept in. Maybe they're not viewing poker players as this untapped entity that they have to schmooze in the same way. But Unibet are very different, actually, and Unibet's still almost like in an old school way. I say old school, like other companies were doing maybe 10 years ago, are trying to put on a really good show. So when you win a Unibet Open, you get money for your flights, you get 4 or 5 star accommodation, you get your breakfast and your dinner. So you really don't have to put your hand in your pocket too often. There's usually 2 or 3 parties over the 5 or 6 days. So again, even to buy a few pints and enjoy yourself in the evening time, you don't have to put your hand in your pocket there. There's sometimes a little event or excursion put on as well, which is really nice. So I think Unibet very much trying to roll out the red carpet, something that was acknowledged this year wonderfully. I'm very disappointed that they didn't manage to win, but they were the only, or maybe not the only one. I think 888 may have also been nominated, but 888 and Unibet were the only European brands nominated for mid-major tour at those GPI awards, and I think very deservedly as well. I think some acknowledgement there from the panel and the nomination committee to see what Unibet are trying to do in that space and grow a brand, because remember, Unibet Poker was just on a network. It was just a skin on a network 4 years ago, and it's basically grown since then, having moved across onto its own network. It's basically its own standalone client now, and that's a really brave move to make in what would be a pretty tough climate, with particularly at the time PokerStars being a virtual monopoly. I think they took a big gamble there, and that gamble is paying off. As you see, when the financial reports come out every 3 months, it's growing huge amounts. I think it's grown maybe 200% in the couple of years I've been there. So you're talking about big growth, and hopefully it'll become one of the big players.
Nice. It's good to see any sort of growth and success for any of the online poker operators. And of course, having attended that live event in Bucharest myself, at least from my one experience, I can testify that you certainly have a great time, and that red carpet certainly is rolled out. When we come back, we'll shift gears and we'll learn more about David's poker endeavors off the felt. But first, a little strategy break.
It's becoming increasingly common for players to employ diverse strategies when playing unopened from the small blind. In the past, we used to imagine that the small blind should either open raise, usually around 36 to 40% of the time, or simply open fold. Completing was never really considered because, after all, everyone just knew that limping is always terrible, regardless of the situation. In more recent times, a trend began at the higher stakes where good players were completing a 70% range in the small blind and having a 0 open raising range. They would respond to big blind ISO raises by having a limp fold, limp call, and limp raising range. Now, although this might not be the best strategy for all games, it can't hurt to familiarize ourselves with this alternative line while playing from the small blind, especially if we have either always open raised or open folded in the past. So here is the small blind completing challenge. For the next few sessions, we always open limp the small blind when it's folded around to us. We'll look to limp raise the top of our range, limp call the speculative holdings, and limp fold the trash holdings. If our opponent checks back the big blind, we bet every single flop. This is, in fact, a lesser known automatic profit spot. The average villain folds way too frequently to small blind bets on the flop after checking back the big blind. When we return to our original strategy, we'll find our confidence in our small blind play increases dramatically, since we'll have a wider array of tactics at our disposal.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Red Chip Poker Podcast. Robbie Straczynski here with professional poker player and Unibet ambassador, David Lappin. David, you're well known to be very open, very honest with your opinions, and I think everyone who has gotten halfway through the podcast so far, they can certainly hear that from you. It seems to me that the overwhelming majority of poker players just sort of go about their business. They play, they just do their thing, they show up every day. But from following you on social media, I know that you're certainly not one to shy away from controversy, even if it means stirring the pot and mixing it up in public with some of the best-known personalities of the game, like Daniel Negreanu, for instance. Some might argue that you're just looking to boost your own profile, however, by stepping on others. Is there perhaps a kernel of truth to that notion?
Look, I would be lying if I didn't say that having a public fight with Daniel Negreanu didn't boost my profile. I would be lying if I said that writing a blog criticizing him didn't boost my profile. It went viral. But honestly, the objective is not that. The objective is to criticize somebody you feel is making grotesque statements about the game you love and the players who play the game you love. And the bottom line is, I could have written a blog like the one I wrote that got so much attention a year earlier. You know, there have been so many things that I've bitten my tongue about, and I'm not one to bite my tongue normally. So it was just sort of enough is enough. And to come to that, myself and obviously my co-host on the podcast, Dara, also penned a fantastic blog, kind of coming at the same issue from a different angle. And, you know, I don't kind of care if there's a perceived, like, someone's in the high echelon and you're kind of lower down in social status. Like, I just don't think that stuff matters. If you think something is wrong, you should speak out to how wrong it is. I don't have to kind of gain a certain social status before I'm entitled to have an opinion, as far as I'm concerned. And I just decided to voice my opinion then because enough was enough in my mind. And I felt like I had something to say and I really wanted to get it off my chest. The fact that so many people grabbed onto it, like, that blog could have just like sunk and been read by nobody, but it obviously did resonate with a certain percentage, a certain number of the poker populace, and they retweeted it and they made it go viral. I didn't make it go viral, and Dara's follow-up went even more viral. And again, he just wrote what he writes every week in his blog, you know, voicing his opinions on things. It just so happened that we tapped into something that most people believe these days, and I think that was the really telling thing for me, is that Daniel Negreanu has literally 1,000 times the number of followers that I have or that Dara has. Yes, when you looked at the responses to what was said, it was overwhelmingly on our side, which just says to me, Daniel's not got his finger on the pulse. He's just, you know, out of touch, unfortunately. I feel like, you know, maybe living in Daniel world for a long time has corrupted his sense of balance to some extent. I think maybe, you know, he's a very articulate guy. He's a really good speaker. He was a phenomenal ambassador for poker for many, many years. He always had my respect. And that respect has just, you know, incrementally gone down over the years. And, you know, to the point that recently he has said some really ugly things. It's not just, you know, sort of standing on a soapbox and saying who I think is good for poker and who shouldn't be playing like he did. I know he tracked back on that stuff, and I think he tracked back on it largely because of the public outcry related to our blogs and just the very fact that what he said was so ugly in the first place. But then, you know, even more recently, I've had a couple of other spats with him. He made an absolutely awful comment about adoption. He referred to it as buying children, and he really doubled down on the fact that it was buying children in his mind. And it took a young lad to go on his Twitter feed and say, I'm an adopted kid and I've had to put up with this shit all my life. I don't want to have to, you know, hear this from somebody who's in a position of influence like you are. And I think you should really think about what you said. And then Daniel doubles down to him and says, well, your parents obviously got a good deal when they bought you if they didn't have to pay lots of money for you. And you're like, what are you saying? Like, this is absolutely crazy stuff. I don't know what state of mind he's in when he comes out with these things. But in the end, he sort of backtracked into a sort of well, no, actually, I'm just joking, and people can't take a joke, and this is faux outrage. And I really find it despicable if somebody is going to say something really offensive, and then people get offended, and then he's going to try and like fake news us by going, "Oh, it's faux outrage, guys. Sorry, I can't actually take what you're saying seriously because you're an outrage machine that just wants to react to things to get clicks." When he's the guy who gets more clicks than anyone anyway. Like it's like that's unfathomable to me. And I suppose I'm not. It's not. Something I will do is like stand to one side when that happens, neither will Dara. So we speak up on that. And then, okay, yes, a few weeks ago, we had this very petty moment. I don't even care about this one, but, it was well reported at by Poker News that at the award ceremony when we were read out, and, as I said, I was thinking, like, what if I had actually been at the ceremony and this was what I'd had to endure by the person who is representing the brand who are sponsoring the event. But anyway, luckily I wasn't there, or not luckily, I would have liked to have been there to collect the award, but I wasn't there, and he was like booing and oohing when we won and spreading kind of nasty words about us after we won. And it's like, do you know what, I actually just I get that he doesn't like us. I get that we've been vociferous against his views. I understand. I respect him as a person. I think he can have his opinions, but I think he's in a really dangerous place now where it's slipping away from him. The grasp he had on poker popularity is slipping through his fingers right now, and every single thing he does at the moment seems to be making that worse for himself.
Interesting. It's always very interesting to hear differences of opinion, and I personally have a very good relationship with Daniel as well as with you, David, and longtime listeners here at the Red Chip Poker Podcast know that we don't really delve into the poker Twitter sphere and interpersonal disagreements or arguments, as it were, but it is out there. It's important to acknowledge excuse me, that these things do happen, and not necessarily to censor one view because you happen to be friends with one or the other. So it was a little bit of a loaded question to you, I do admit, and as I did say, you're never afraid of controversy. You don't shy away from it, and it's good to get your opinion out there, be acknowledged. But I'm not going to get into that. I'm not going to go too deep.
Robbie, you lost your calling as a hostage negotiator because you could mediate any of these situations. Maybe you can get me and Daniel in a room and we can find some more common ground, which I'd actually genuinely like to do, because I do feel like there's a huge amount of misunderstanding at the core. I think he's probably reacted very poorly to what we've done and said. And I understand that because, he feels under attack. But at the same time, he's in a position of such utter privilege that, you can afford to, stand up there, with all the lights shining on you and maybe have a conversation with the other side that doesn't need to end up in name calling. And I would prefer that personally as well, I got to say.
Okay, So I'm gonna use that. I'm gonna go specifically on that point, and that's why when preparing my list of questions, I said I don't like getting into controversy, and maybe that's not necessarily what people tune in for here at the Red Chip Poker Podcast. But the main thing I wanted to try and get out of it from you, David, actually, was not that previous question, but actually leading into this exact same question. It happens within, we're all people. We all have our opinions. We have disagreements. Sometimes we don't necessarily see eye to eye. And it seems to be that all of these things happen in the public forum. And as you said, wouldn't it be great, Robbie, if you could go ahead and get the two of you guys sitting together? I would love nothing more than that, to sit with both of you, because I get along with both of you so well. Why do you feel, David, that it's important to be outspoken in that way, and not you personally, but in general, and to feel that these types of discussions need to be taking place in public forums like Twitter rather than privately through text messaging, through email, through, in-person conversations? Why does everything always need to be dragged out in public and put to the the whims of all of these hundreds of thousands of poker fans seeing these fights? Why can't it just happen behind closed doors?
Well, I suppose you'd have to ask the person who wrote the first tweet. For me, I don't have access to Daniel Negreanu. We don't have each other's phone number. We don't email. I don't live in the same city as him. So contacting in a form other than Twitter would be impossible for me. At some level, and I don't want to overstate this because there's an awful lot of like really catastrophic things happening in the world that require truth to be spoken to power. This is a very like weird little silly poker microcosm version of that. But in the end of the day, it is truth to power. It's an influential person using their influence to speak out on certain issues, and me not agreeing with that, and perhaps the part that Daniel doesn't realize is most people don't agree with that. And, I have no alternative but to respond with a tweet or a blog that I, market through Twitter or whatever it would be. You're right. It would be a much better place if these social mediums didn't exist at some level, because, we would have maybe a greater proclivity to pick up the phone or meet one another and have a better quality of dialogue that wasn't restricted to 280 characters. I do share what you mean by that, and I do think it can get a bit puerile at times, and I don't like when it ends up in that place. I would prefer it was I studied philosophy in school. I spent years teaching philosophy, and for me it's much greater to sit and have dialogue like we're having a chat now. I think that's a much better forum for this. But unfortunately, I guess there are constraints in the way the modern world works and how social media works, and I guess that's why it's gone there. I gotta say, for a man who doesn't welcome controversy, you've penned an absolutely phenomenal book. I don't know if you ever get the chance to advertise it yourself, but I want to advertise it for you. When you translated Elia Lesra's fantastic book, it did come with a little bit of controversy, so maybe you're more used to it than you realize. Maybe you'd be ideal to mediate these situations for us. You have a bit of experience at putting out fires.
Well, thank you very much, David. It's very not the direction I thought you'd be going in with that answer, but thank you for saying that. I appreciate it. And thank you for acknowledging that there are also other ways, and I do try to always make sure that things stay on more of a positive keel. And if I can be known as quote unquote the Nokia of poker, connecting people in whatever way, shape, or form, that's something to do. And I think a lesson for all of us to sort of think about, at least, does it always have to be the current way it is? Perhaps there are ways to improve, even though we don't always necessarily see eye to eye. But not necessarily the focus of this discussion. We'll move on to a little bit of a different topic. Beyond your active social media profile, David, beyond your career at the Felt and role as a Unibet Poker ambassador, of course, we've mentioned numerous times throughout the interview here that you're the co-host of the Chip Race podcast, again, along with one of our former guests, Dara O'Kearney. Just a few weeks ago, you guys won that Global Poker Award for Podcast of the Year. In the weeks leading up to this ceremony on social media, you had not been hiding the fact that you were a nominee. You certainly made the most of it. It's a great honor, a brilliant marketing tool to have. What does earning the win mean to you?
That's a great question. I'm going to be perfectly honest with you here. When we were nominated, I was gobsmacked. I didn't think we would. And because I have a sort of a wormy strategy poker player's brain, I thought, well, we have to kind of use this for whatever publicity purposes we can. Because for me and Dara, we put so many hours into making the best show we can. We try to create conflict, and diverse opinions, and bring people on from different demographics and have, meaty conversations. We don't want the show to ever be boring. In the end of the day, I'm not saying it has to descend into arguing, but when you do have a good old tussle with someone, or you do have a proper chat where you voice your opinions, it's much more engaging for the listener. And we structure our interviews that way to make it that way. Dara puts an awful lot of time into strategy. We talk about topical issues of the day as well. So there is a huge amount of work goes in. When we put that work in, we are only thinking about making the best show we can. But Dara and I have a very are very simpatico on the notion that once it's made, now we have to whore it out. Now we have to sell it, and we don't want to put all this work into something that we believe in and do dutifully for it to not be heard by anyone. You have to then kind of switch into your salesman brain, and we've always been that way. We've always tried to kind of sell the show and take every opportunity we could to get press or media, or using our blogs or our tweet using our Twitter or Facebook or whatever it is. So this was just amazing. This fell onto our lap. This was an amazing sales tool. We could use this. We could market ourselves on this for a few weeks, a bit like the movies, in early January, going Oscar nominated movie to try and get you to go to
Certainly.
it. We could certainly maybe pick up a few hundred extra listeners. Our listenership is, probably anything between 12 and 14,000, and we thought, well, we could add another 1,000 to that maybe off the back of this. This would be fantastic. fantastic. So we were just like using it as best we could in a very cynical way, I feel, to try to get that. I genuinely had no expectation for us winning. So when we won, that part of my brain should have been engaged again. I should have been like, oh my God, we've won now. How do we, like, let's take out an ad in a trade press or something. But I was just like, oh shit, I just want to like hug everybody who's helped me along the way. Yourself included, Robbie. You've been so wonderful, spreading the word for us, retweeting us, doing interviews with us over the years, and so many other people in the press. We're so lucky. Lee Davey springs to mind, Will Schilliber. All the guys from Poker News, Martin Harris. I look, if I do the list, go read my blog and you'll get the full list, I hope. but I felt so overwhelmingly. I called it Roberto Benigni-esque in that moment, where suddenly I just want to stand up on a chair and just hug everyone and be grateful, because it is a team effort. We are backed by Unibet, who give us an amazing amount of creative freedom, which we really appreciate. David Pomeroy, threw us the ball a couple of years ago, and that has been immense. Willie Elliott is our one-man media, animation, marketing, graphics team, and he just does silly hours for us, probably hours he doesn't even bill for us, and we really appreciate that. Diva Byrne, who has been the consistent female voice in a show that I hope gives as much representation to women as we possibly can, but she has been a consistent voice through all the seasons of the show, and a wonderful one at that. She has her finger on the pulse of kind of women's advocacy in poker, and she's a phenomenal player in her own right. Joins us in the strategy pieces. She's been amazing. Dara Davey and Ian Simpson have both been doing the news pieces, but also been consultants and good friends and consiglieres over the years as well. Tom Stanton has edited the show with me. We've had other editors too over the years, Rob King and Collie O'Neill. So there was just this enormous laundry list of people who've helped us in small and big ways that I just wanted to call up and say thank you so much. We totally didn't expect this. And so I probably haven't done enough shilling now and trying to sell the show off the back of it, because I've been a bit like sidestepped by the need to just, to celebrate and thank everybody. So, we're going to do a couple of extra shows now that we weren't expecting to make, where hopefully we'll get on some other GPI oriented guests. Yourself, of course, as well, Robbie. You took down an amazingly prestigious prize. I was so over the moon to hear your name read out. So congratulations to you. Very, very deserved. You could have been nominated in any one of about 5 categories, but so fitting in a way that the area you were nominated for is in the generosity stakes, because you're nothing if not a generous person.
Thank you so much. Well, this is not one about me, David. We're going to keep the focus on you. I appreciate that. But leading into my next question, and all of the congratulatory messages, they start pouring into you, and all your friends start saying, job well done. Is this the type of thing, you mentioned you're going to make a couple extra episodes. Do you sort of say, okay, we did it. Yay, excellent. Or is this more a motivation to try and scale things up, do more, go bigger in some way? What comes after winning an award like this?
Yeah, it's a good question. I suppose scaling up in terms of maybe our listenership would be wonderful, and if we manage that through whatever marketing means, that would be wonderful. But no, like this season, we've already done 7 shows this year. We've tried to just go about sticking to the format, the structure, the 5 different segments. We've had some amazing guests on this year. We've already booked our guests for the next 4 or 5 shows, and they're going to be big names as well. I can promise you that. So that's going to be, our focus is just keep making good shows. Awards are ultimately kind of the silly thing, and I actually would find it quite uncouth to celebrate awards. So I find it weird that my own natural cynicism has been stripped away, where I actually just feel really grateful and really happy to have it, and feel like it's a pat on the back from your peers, which is very out of character. For anyone who knows me properly would think, like, what's happened? Where did Dave go? What have they done with him? Because I normally wouldn't be somebody who would think that way. I have to give a couple of important shout outs here. The one person who stands out amongst the jury, Jaime Kerstetter, she was on the jury, and she is also a nominee in the same category, and I love her work with Chad, shining a light on mid-stakes stuff in the States, where the less obvious stuff getting a bit of a love and attention, which I think is wonderful. And she's a phenomenal personality. I think she's amazing, and Chad is a great guy. We've had them both on the show. And I know that Jamie was in a spot where she wasn't supposed to have a vote for that category, if you like. They were in the jury room, and she's not meant to. She's meant to recuse herself because she's got a conflict of interest, and she didn't want to recuse herself because she wanted to speak up on our behalf, which I thought was incredible grace and incredible, generosity of spirit. And I have to give her an awful lot of props for that. Dara and I, have become good pals with her over the last, month or so since we had her on the show. And I have to say that was like an incredible gesture. She obviously felt like we deserved it, which we really appreciate. But, a lot of people would not put their neck out like that, particularly when we would have been sort of seen as the left field candidate for that award. I also got to say, it is a privilege every day working with Dara O'Kearney. Dara is an incredible mind. He's an incredible human being. He's a very kind, compassionate person, very emotional guy. Not that maybe a lot of people who are aware of his, maybe poker persona are aware, but he's a very emotional guy. He's very in touch with his feelings. And he's a great friend and a great confidant. And it's just a pleasure having an excuse to spend 10 hours a week or whatever it ends up being, working directly with him on something that we both care about and we both want to, make as good as we can.
Beautiful. And I got to say, it's after a win like this, the different experiences that come one's way during life, they can change even long-rooted customs, habits, traits. And you had said, where's David? Where's the David we knew? And all of a sudden this experience came your way. And another layer of the David Lappin onion seems to have been peeled off and reveals something very interesting about you. And I'm pleased to have been able to ask you these questions and reveal this thankful, grateful side of you. And it's it'd be nice to keep seeing some of that as well as you continue your fine work. David, we only got one last major question here, and then we'll get into the wrap up. You mentioned Jaime Kerstetter, of course, yourself, Dara. It seems like an increasing number of professional poker players these days, they're sort of dipping their toes into content creation, including vlogs, streams, podcasting, broadcast commentary. Of course, Maria Ho won that award as well. I know that myself, beyond producing content, I also love consuming it, but it's essentially impossible to watch and listen to it all. There just aren't enough hours in the day. Do you feel we're reaching a bit of a saturation point as far as poker media, or maybe there's a little bit room still for some more content to be produced? Just leave that open for you to think about.
Well, I think the means of production are so much easier than they used to be. You can sit in your bedroom and make a podcast these days. Ostensibly, that is what Tara and I do. And, that means that you can have more voices, but maybe those voices don't get heard by that many people. I know a lot of Twitch streams go out every day, but maybe only have, 10 or 20 or 30 viewers at a time. And, that's very modest numbers. Obviously, it's still, you'd go on stage for a theatre production if there were 30 people in the audience, but at the same time, that they're not doing Lex numbers where there's 10,000 people in his stream. So, I don't think it's an issue that there's more of it there, because I think in the end of the day, the market will decide who gets attention and who gets, breaks out in a sense. And you're right, there aren't enough hours in the day to listen to every episode of every podcast, for example. So that, that renders anyone's opinion on who is the best podcast out there incomplete. You're working on incomplete information, which I guess poker players are good at doing, but you're taking a hunch based on the episodes you heard, based on the clips you heard, based on maybe the integrity of the people you feel are involved. And I think that's maybe part and parcel of the overall impression. There's probably nobody who's watched every minute of Lex Vilhus's stream. There's certainly not nobody who's watched every minute of Ian Simpson, my colleague's stream. Nobody ever could bear that. That would be some sort of cruel, Clockwork Orange kind of torture. But no, in all seriousness, the means of production are easier, so there will be more of it. I don't think it's an issue going forward. I think quality will always shine through, and I think people who are putting their time and effort into structuring something well, like you do yourself in lots of different mediums, Robbie, where you're producing excellent podcast content, you're writing so well, you're making videos. When people are working in all those spaces, it shows if the stuff is good, and there'll be bums on seats, watching it and listening to it if it's good. And I think, it's great to see so many different types of content out there now. And I think some are maybe hit some demographics better than others. I think, the young kids seem to love their Twitch these days. Old fogies like you and me probably still like reading print media. I read your long Russian piece the other day. That was longer than most people would recommend these days. But, I like delving into something over a coffee in the morning. I used to read the newspaper every day in college. Whoever buys a newspaper now, but I'm still doing it virtually through Twitter or through my phone on the news feeds or whatever, and trying to read as much as I can. I don't think people should be too worried that they can't see everything. It's probably a relief to just think, oh, good, I don't, because you used to be able to watch the news for half an hour and read the newspaper cover to cover, and it was like that was okay. That's it. That's all the news. I got it all. Whereas now it's all out there, and I suppose you have to pick and choose what you like, and maybe trust recommendations as well. I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm not sure if that answers your question, or was that exactly what you meant?
I think that is a good answer, and I think that you sort of hit it also on the end. Like in poker, there's lots of tables you can sit at, but game selection is very important. And it was good, complex answer, very interesting answer from a very complex and interesting person. David, I've always enjoyed chatting with you, and I've told you many times, as a good son of the Emerald Isle, you have kissed that Blarney Stone. You have that gift of gab. I want to thank you very much, David Lappin, for coming on the show today. If any of our listeners would like to reach out and get in touch with some more questions, berate you for your poor poker plays, or maybe they have a kind word to share about your excellent podcast work, how can they reach you?
You can find me on Twitter at DK Lappin, or Dana Coupin, as Sasha Salinger referred to me in that now infamous video. So that's at DK Lappin. I have a blog at dklappin.com. You can also hit me up on Facebook. Yeah, I usually just like blanket follow everyone on Facebook who asks for requests, because that's just kind of how you use it these days. It's like a directory. Twitter is probably the best spot if you want to hit me up. Check out the podcast. It's The Chip Race. You can find it on SoundCloud and iTunes. And that's probably it.
Brilliant. David, thank you again very much. Thank you everyone here for tuning in. I'm Robbie Straczynski, and you've been listening to the Red Chip Poker Podcast.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode. But don't stop learning now. Head over to redchippoker.com. You'll find everything you need to get better today. Join our free, friendly strategy group and start talking poker with our coaches and community. And listen, if you're ready to take poker more seriously, sign up for Core, our $5 a week complete training platform built for players who have limited time to study. Core is packed with over 100 bite-sized lessons, from the fundamentals to advanced strategies, quizzes, achievements, discussion threads, and more. And for the bravest of heart, we invite you to check out our Pro membership, which includes 24/7 access to hundreds of videos, all of our playlists, all of our crash courses, and more. If you want to see what the top 1% of players are studying to keep their edges razor sharp, visit redchippoker.com/Ruby. That's RUBY, and get a special deal on your first 3 weeks. Until next time, run good, play better, and get there.